मलाई पनि अगाडि आइदिनुको लागि म हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्दछु। सँगसँगै मिस्टर रामकृष्ण खतिवडा CEO नेपाल इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर ब्याङ्क लिमिटेड उहाँलाई पनि अगाडि जोइन गरिदिनुको लागि म हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्दछु। I'd also like to request Professor Dr. Tae Young Jung, Professor Yonsei University, to kindly join us in this panel. He's also the Director for Sustainable Development Program at the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for the Better Future. We'd also like to request Mr. Robert Dobias, Advisor, Climate Change Center, National Research Council of Thailand, to kindly join us on stage. He began his 40 years of environmental conservation work in Asia as a US Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand. It is with pleasure that we also invite Mr. Stephen Daniel, Sector Leader for Sustainable Development, World Bank. He leads the World Bank's Green Growth, Environment and Natural Resource Management engagement. I'd also like to invite Dr. Ramprasad Dital, former ED, Alternative Energy Promotion Center, on stage. And I'd also like to invite our moderator for this session, Professor Dr. Shobakar Takal, Vice President, Academics Affairs, Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. He's also a professor at the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate. So ladies and gentlemen, our stage is all set for this discussion on opportunities for green infrastructure. There is no doubt that infrastructure is the key driver when it comes to growth, employment, and better quality of life in emerging markets and developing economies. But we have to realize that approximately 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from infrastructure constructions and operations such as power plants, buildings, and transport. COVID-19 has served as a warning to the world that global crisis not just adds unexpected cost to the economy, but also takes no time to reverse the development gains achieved in the past. The global health crisis has also drawn attention to climate change as another impending global crisis if efforts are not made to prevent it. र हामी सबैले पनि सायद यो वेदरमा, यो फ्लडमा feel पनि गरिरहेका छौं that the climate crisis is here and something needs to be done about it. We look forward to this amazing panel and what they have to say when it comes to opportunities for green infrastructure development. I would now like to hand over the floor to our moderator, Professor Dr. Shobakar Takal.
Can you? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sadiksha. Thank you so much. And good to see you, Sadiksha. Very pleased to mention that Sadiksha is one of the alumni of my institute. Very, very good to see you, Sadiksha. First of all, I'd like to welcome Honorable Minister of Ministry of Forest and Environment for very kindly gracing this event as a chair. Distinguished panelists, colleagues and friends in this room. In this particular session, we are going to discuss about green infrastructure. We did talk about infrastructure quite elaborately this morning, afternoon, and also yesterday. But green infrastructure is something which has been evolving in the discourse of infrastructure development in last few years. Before I invite our distinguished panelists who are here, let me say few words about why green infrastructure. If you allow me, I'll be switching back and forth between Nepali and English, if you allow me. Green infrastructure भन्दा अलिकति फरक छ भन्ने कुरो हामी सबैले बुझेकै कुरो हो. Last year, UNEP ले एउटा रिपोर्ट पब्लिश गरेको थियो र त्यो रिपोर्टमा के भनेको छ भने यो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरले चाहिँ कति कन्ट्रिब्युट गर्छ ग्लोबल ग्रीनहाउस ग्यास एमिसनमा, हाम्रो क्लाइमेट चेन्ज कजिङ ग्यासेसमा, त्यो 79% responsible from infrastructure. त्यसै गरी हाम्रो चाहिँ नि एडाप्टेसनमा पनि इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर cost is almost 88% of the adaptation cost. That's why infrastructure ko role एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट छ. इट्स भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट. त्यसमा कुनै हाम्रो डाउट छैन. र हामी चाहिँ नि फ्युचरमा इन द फ्युचर पनि इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर जुन रेटमा हामीले चाहिँ नि बिल्ड गर्दैछौँ गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ, त्यसले पनि हामीलाई एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट लेसन हामी चाहिँ नि अपेक्षा गरिरहेछौँ. किनभने फ्युचर एक्सपेक्टेड एमिसन्स फ्रम फ्युचर इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर्स already planned or existing infrastructure, त्यसको रोल चाहिँ नि क्लाइमेट चेन्जमा एकदमै धेरै छ. हामी जुन रेटमा अहिले इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाइरहेछौँ त्यही रेटलाई हामीले कन्टिन्यू गरेर एक्जिस्टिङ र प्लान्ड इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरलाई पनि त्यही रेटमा गऱ्यौँ भने चाहिँ नि त्यसले चाहिँ हाम्रो 1.5 डिग्री क्लाइमेट स्टेबलाइजेसन टार्गेट जुन प्यारिस एग्रिमेन्टको छ त्यसलाई चाहिँ नि हामी मिट गर्न सक्दैनौँ. र हाम्रो रिमेनिङ एमिसन बजेट जति हामी स्पेन्ड गर्न सक्छौँ त्यो त अलरेडी इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरले त्यतिभन्दा बढी गर्न सक्छ. मैले भन्न खोजेको छु किनभने वाट आइएम ट्राइङ टु से इज द्याट रोल अफ इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर इज भेरी भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट. एन्ड अल्सो आफ्टर कोभिड-19 पछिको हाम्रो जुन डिस्कोर्स छ रिकभरीमा पनि छ. रिकभरीमा चाहिँ नि इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरको एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट रोल छ. र त्यो कोभिड रिकभरीको लागि चाहिँ नि हामी कसरी चाहिँ नि ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरलाई अगाडि बढाउन सक्छौँ भन्ने कुरो पनि इम्पोर्टेन्ट गरी आइरहेछ. देयर वाज अ इन्टरनेसनल फाइनेन्स कर्पोरेसन IFCले एउटा रिपोर्ट रिसेन्टली प्रड्युस गरेको थियो साउथ एसियामा. र क्लाइमेट इन्भेस्टमेन्ट अपर्च्युनिटी $3.4 ट्रिलियन साउथ एसियामा फ्रम 2018 to 2030. यसको मिनिङ के हो भने अब हामीसँग एकदमै धेरै नै इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर इन्भेस्टमेन्ट अपर्च्युनिटी छ र त्यसमा चाहिँ नि रोल अफ प्राइभेट सेक्टर इज भेरी भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट. त्यो कुराहरू चाहिँ नि परहाप्स मैले धेरै इलाबोरेट गर्नु पर्दैन. अब नेपालको केसमा इन केस अफ नेपाल there are several policy targets, there are several mechanisms, it's in working. अब हाम्रो SDG टार्गेट्सहरू छ, हाम्रो प्यारिस एग्रिमेन्टको कमिटमेन्ट छ, हाम्रो 2045 जेरो एमिसन टार्गेटहरू छ. यी सब कुराहरू र हाम्रो इभन सेन्ट्रल ब्याङ्कले चाहिँ नि यो ESRM एन्भाइरोमेन्ट एन्ड सोसल रिस्क म्यानेजमेन्ट गाइडलाइन्सहरू चाहिँ नि लेन्डिङको लागि पनि राखिरहेको छ. यो सबै कुराले हामीलाई चाहिँ नि ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरमा जानको लागि चाहिँ नि हामीलाई प्रेरित गरिरहेको छ. र अब हिजो पनि र आज पनि धेरै नम्बरहरू हामीले भनिसक्यौँ. कति हाम्रो इन्भेस्टमेन्ट ग्याप नेपालमा कति छ भन्ने कुरा हामीले गरिसक्यौँ. म त्यसमा धेरै जान चाहन्न. तर अब नेपालको लागि चाहिँ नि ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरको अपर्च्युनिटी के छ अब त्यही विषयमा हामी आज डिस्कस गर्छौँ. We have a distinguished set of our colleagues from different countries, and also they will share with us the international experience, what those international experience means for us in Nepal. Our colleagues from Nepal would try to add on in that perspective. So what we are aiming in this particular session is that what is green infrastructure, why we need it, why it makes sense for Nepalese policy discourse, what can we do about it, हाम्रो यसको लागि हाम्रो च्यालेन्ज के छ, अपर्च्युनिटिज के छ ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेभलपमेन्टको लागि, र ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेभलपमेन्ट गर्नको लागि र ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरलाई स्केलिङ अप गर्नको लागि रोल अफ गभर्मेन्ट, रोल अफ प्राइभेट सेक्टर, रोल अफ डेभलपमेन्ट पार्टनर्स, रोल अफ सेन्ट्रल ब्याङ्क, हामी कसरी चाहिँ अगाडि बढ्नुपर्छ र पर्टिकुलरली फाइनेन्सियल इन्स्ट्रुमेन्ट्सहरूलाई हामीले कसरी मोबिलाइज गर्नुपर्छ ग्रिन इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरलाई स्केलिङ अप गर्नको लागि, र हामी अरू कन्ट्रीबाट के लेसन लिन सक्छौँ. त्यसैको सेरोफेरोमा हामी चाहिँ नि यो पेनल डिस्कसन गर्न गइरहेका छौँ. र अलिकति यो पेनल डिस्कसनको लागि चाहिँ नि म पहिला हाम्रो चाहिँ नि कोलिग्सहरूलाई चाहिँ नि अलिकति हाम्रो अलिकति हामी डिस्कस पनि अलरेडी गरेका छौँ. फर्स्ट आइड लाइक टु इन्भाइट colleagues to give their short remarks, then we'll go for some discussion. And also I might be inviting Honorable Minister in the middle as he has to go for emergency cabinet meeting at 5 o'clock. So Honorable Minister will be giving his views, his insights somewhere in the middle of the session. First, let me invite Steve and Stefan from the World Bank to give his views on it surrounding Nepal and also international experience. Steve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I live here in Nepal. I'm part of the World Bank's management team, and I'm responsible for our support to the government for, excuse me, the government's Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development Initiative. But I want to start with an example of what green infrastructure would mean to us, with something that doesn't involve the World Bank at all, but comes from my country, the United States. And that is, in New York City in the 1990s, they were faced with a choice. They could either spend $6 to $8 billion on a water supply and treatment facility, or they could save a ton of money and protect the watershed that the water comes from, 200 kilometers away in the Catskill Mountains. They did that by setting up a water fund to provide financing to farmers to do more sustainable farm management, and also to conserve some of the watershed. So they acquired some land. And the result is that they saved around $5 billion compared to a $6 to $8 billion price tag. And these are the kinds of solutions that need to be rolled out in a developing country context, including in Nepal. So this year, we signed a financing agreement with Nepal for a new water supply operation. And it's a $95 million component for water supply in an urban setting, not Kathmandu, and a $5 million component on watershed management. This is critical because the water regime in Nepal is already changing because of the climate. The flow is less predictable. It's not resilient. And so this kind of combined strategy within one investment operation is what I would call green infrastructure, one example. Another example is with the Ministry of Forest and Environment and the Department of Transport. We are financing a large-scale new project, a regional project on roads, but there's an innovation involved that is green infrastructure. It is also setting up green corridors, working closely with the Ministry of Forest and Environment to plan a territorial approach to reforestation and forest protection. And this is part of a much broader forest program as well. So it's important to keep in mind that forests, wetlands, rivers, this is part of the infrastructure assets of a country. And we have to value that. The natural capital is as important as the built capital. And when you combine them together, you get much more benefits for many more people that are much more resilient. The last thing I want to say is the government recognizes this. And we, the World Bank, with 15 development partners, have gotten behind the government's push to operationalize its Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development Initiative. This is led by the Ministry of Finance, and other sectors are involved. All the sectors are involved. And it's been going on for about a year and a half, starting with the Kathmandu Declaration on GRID in September 2021. The Prime Minister of Nepal announced this as well at COP26 in Glasgow. And then now the government is preparing an action plan. And this action plan includes $7.3 billion of existing overseas development support and future pipeline support that needs to be, that's earmarked for green infrastructure and other green outcomes, but needs to be programmed. So it really comes down to what the design of projects are going to be. But, there's a very big but. Overseas development assistance is a small part of the financing strategy. At the same time, the government's fiscal space is very low, it's very limited. The main opportunity is private sector. And private investment is the way, and pretty much the only way, that Nepal is going to be able to implement green, resilient, inclusive development. So that means working on the enabling environment, and I think some of the colleagues here are going to talk about what some of the barriers in the enabling environment are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Green infrastructure is not something different. Something is not very, very new. In case of Nepal and in other countries, climate resilient, low carbon, natural resource friendly infrastructure, generally we mean by green infrastructure. that brings the dimensions of things like urban transport, wastewater treatment, urban water, renewable energy, climate smart agriculture, green buildings, all a broad range of infrastructure. Now, in that line, maybe our colleague from Nepal, maybe Mr. Hital can shed some light on what this actually means for Nepal, especially when it comes to green infrastructure. Do you want to share some thoughts there?
Thank you, Dar Saab, Honorable Minister and fellow panelists and participants. Let me actually refer the recent economic survey, which was brought out very recently by Ministry of Finance. And since I come from energy, so I try to relate what does this green infrastructure means for me. The total energy consumption in 2021 was about 174 terawatt hour. And out of this, 28% actually comes from imported fuels. That meaning we had to actually spend close to 154 billion Nepalese rupees last year. And it is expected that this year, the figure will be double. That too for, to import this dirty fuel, especially when you want to actually promote green infrastructure, green energy. Our aim should be to actually replace those petroleum products, number one. Number two, in the domestic side, close to 66% energy is actually being consumed from the traditional biomass, right? Whereas electricity contributes only about 4% and renewable energy is less than 2%. So why I'm bringing this issue together is basically our energy consumption pattern is not sustainable. We're heavily dependent on imported fuel in one side and traditional unsustainable biomass in another side. How do we actually convert these situations in our case? We claim that we're very rich in natural resources. We're very rich in hydropower. Technically, we could generate 43 gigawatt of electricity, but we've not been able to generate less than 2.2 gigawatt. But in terms of green, the project that should reduce greenhouse gas emissions, project that establishes environment, social, climate-related indicators in the project. When you approve the project, the financing authority actually, addresses all those issues. And when you want to, track the progress again, whether these indicators are met or not. Not only for hydropower or not only for energy, but also other infrastructure projects. If any projects meets the social, environment, climate-related indicators, those projects should be considered as green projects. For us, hydropower, all renewable energies, all other non-hydro renewables are also considered as green. The whole idea is to reduce the consumption of petroleum products. This will not only, increase our, local economy or reduce trade deficit, but also help mitigate, help achieve the net zero emission, which has been placed by our right honorable, prime ministers in Glasgow last year. So we have committed, we have made our commitment to be carbon neutral by 2045. There, all these, green infrastructure, including hydropower and non-hydro renewables, should be promoted. This way, we support our neighbors, India and Bangladesh, in meeting their, carbon target or NDC target. Not only that, but also we help stabilize their grid. That way, I think, in our context, although, infrastructures based on nature should be, defined as green, but in our case, I think those who meet all those criteria, environment, social, climate, this should be considered as green infrastructure projects. And I think when we promote hydropower, when we promote renewable energy, we will be able to meet all those issues. And I think we are heading in the right directions. This much for at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Dital. Maybe I think our Director General from Wildlife, I think Maheshwar Dhakalji, maybe can you shed some light on this green? I think you bring experience of working on climate change and also conservation and wildlife. Any thoughts from you before I move to other colleagues?
Yes, thank you, sir, and Honorable Minister and fellow panelists. I think it's a very prominent topic what we are going to discuss today. Let me talk about the green infrastructure. Green means just not green in color. It is green in terms of productivity and value addition. Basically, we need three characteristics to be the green infrastructure. The first one is sustainability. What type of infrastructure you are going to construct, whether it is railway, highway, airport, or industrial estate, or whatever. You are considering all the segment of the social, economical, or ecological safeguards is fundamental. Sometimes EIA and IEE process, some of the private sectors feels that it is too lengthy, more complicated, and it is a burden of infrastructure development. Sometimes of this type of feelings we do have. That's why be clear that if your infrastructure you are going to green one, then you have to follow all the procedures of the EIA and IE. This is the part of sustainability. The second character, you must have climate resilient. Whatever infrastructure you are going to construct, whether it is climate resilient or not, whether it is going to destroy by the landslides, floods, or inundations. You have to consider all the climatic parameters based on the erratic rainfall or regular rainfall, whatever, or temperature. That's why while you are going to construct, please be clear, temperature and rainfall, most important parameters you have to consider. And your decision-making capacity while designing the infrastructure, you have to consider it. The third parameter is low carbon strategy or low carbon emissions. You are going to construct what type of infrastructures, it should be low carbon strategy. For example, as Dr. Dital said, e-mobility. Now this is the time to use the infrastructures, basically transport, it is the time of e-mobility. At the same times, whatever traffics or the vehicles run in the highway, every traffics should be electric and should carry the products based on the agriculture and forestry, especially in the context of Nepal. Otherwise, you cannot be a green infrastructure anymore. I think this is a very literal and basic information, sir. Thank you very much. I will come next.
Thank you, Dr. Dhakal. I think that really sets us into the very good set here to discuss because we will discuss further on how to scale up such green infrastructure through many different policy and instruments. I'm quite mindful of the fact that Honorable Minister might have to leave very soon. So if I may, I'd like to request Honorable Minister to kindly share some of his thoughts and some of his insights before we move forward. Honorable Minister, may I request your kind 5 minutes? 5 minutes you can spare. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I think we can move ahead. I think I would like to invite at this point to Mr. Bob Dubias, Robert Dubias, to kindly show some of the examples from around the world in this context, especially green infrastructure and what are the experience that we see. Well, I think we have we have slide there. I'd like to request organizer to kindly put up this slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabakar. So I'll take 5 minutes to show you some things that you've just heard from the earlier speakers, starting with a schematic definition of structure from the Canadians, actually, but a good way to think about green infrastructure, I think. The 3 elements here. If you look green infrastructure, and then one down from that is called nature-based solutions. That covers the first 2 boxes, and then you have different types of green infrastructure below that. So, for example, the natural assets aspect of green infrastructure includes wetlands, forests, parks, and so on. That is one type. You have the second type, which my old eyes cannot see. I have to put on my glasses very quickly. The enhanced assets, so not entirely natural, but rain gardens, green roofs, urban trees, and so on. And then finally, the engineered assets, which are not natural, and that is permeable pavements and rain barrels and so on, as you see. And then, of course, these are not green infrastructure. You get over to the right side as gray infrastructure. But your green infrastructure will certainly have an impact on that gray infrastructure on the right side. Have the next slide, please. Oh, okay, good. Okay, so the first example, I want to preface this by saying that green infrastructure is not an idea that is new to Nepal. When all 30 years ago, we did a study for the Arun 3 project. We did not do the EIA study, please, don't misunderstand. We didn't do the EIA study, but we did a development study. And the idea of that was to look at how we can use proceeds from power generation to benefit people and nature in the watershed above the dam. Not to toot my own horn, but while that study eventually it fell victim to other problems with Arun 3. It was used by the World Bank as a teaching aid for many, many years. And basically looking at things like restoring and protecting forests above the dam as being a green infrastructure. Dam proceeds, ecosystem services, which was the proposal for Arun 3. And then, of course, multi-purpose uses whenever possible, and that becomes particularly critical as we look at the impacts of climate change and how that is affecting the glaciers above Nepal and so on. Water supply and quality. I'll just say one thing about this, and that is if you look at several examples, including an example from India. The idea here is using either existing wetlands or to actually create new wetlands to help use their natural to filter water. And if you can see the amounts of money that economists have figured is being benefited through the use of these wetlands and filtering water. 1.4 million per year, $4.2 billion, $2.9 billion per year. Back to what Steve said about big numbers that can be generated through green infrastructure in terms of money. The benefits, watershed protection, and recreation, health and well-being. To be in a natural area actually improves your health, according to studies, biodiversity, air pollution barrier, and so forth. Another example of green infrastructure is tourism. Not tourism itself, but for example, having a, let's say, a cultural tourist site and greening up that cultural tourist site so it becomes more attractive, ultimately attracting more tourists into the area. This is my, and if anybody's, this is from our visit to Nepal 2 months ago. If anybody's interested after the meeting, I can show you more of our slides from our visit. The green roofs. This is something that we see in India and elsewhere. But this one on the top, this top is the largest green roof in Asia, and that's at Thammasat University in Bangkok. Developing urban parks, retention ponds, wetlands, again, the same principles. You can do a lot of, employ a lot of green infrastructure to benefit urban settings. The photograph of this woman here, because she's quite a person, and she's Thai, she's a landscape architect, and she has done all of these projects I'm showing here. And it leads one to understand that a lot of things are going on in Asia. So Nepal doesn't have to kind of make it up all on your own. You can learn a lot from existing projects in India, Thailand, Korea that you'll hear about later and elsewhere. And then finally, this last slide is of vertical farming. This is of interest because this is proposed by a company in Bangkok, and they are now bringing this to investors. What is a 13-floor condominium type of building, but with gardens and farming areas in between. So that middle section, if you look on the right, that section is actually for farming. It's our living areas, and they think they can both build this and sell it and get the financing to do it. So some examples of, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dubias. I think your slide really was visually very appealing. Green infrastructure does not mean only very hard infrastructure, but also a lot of green integration. In much bigger, so that the spectrum of the green infrastructure can be much bigger, and there is a lot to learn for us from the international experience. But the question for us is that yes, green infrastructure is very much needed, which supports Nepal's policy aspiration, which supports the global discussions and discourse which is going on. But the core question still we like to deliberate is that how to scale it up. What are the challenges in order to scale it up? What kind of instruments we have? So in that respect, I'd like to invite Professor Taiyuan Jung, can perhaps share with us some of the challenges and enabling factors for such green infrastructure and infrastructure investment.
Thank you, Professor Takal. And first of all, thank you, organizer CNI. It's my great honor to be here. Well, because of time constraint, I have 3 points. Yeah, and the first one, green infra is not something new. Green infra is not something discussing in this Nepal only. It's a global agenda. That means we are in the race. We means all countries are doing green things. Then I know that in this room, most of the audience are domestic participants. Then ask yourself, is your country, Nepal, is it really attractive to invite the foreign resources to make it happen here in this country? If you say yes, then list out why yes. If not, then why not? So first you have to be frank to evaluate yourself. Your country is attractive enough for foreigners, whatever resources, okay, the financial resources or technology or human resources, ask yourself, and because it's a global competition, okay, that's the first thing I want to mention. Second, in general, when you say green, green infra means something expensive. Who's going to pay this extra cost? Yeah, green is good. We all know that, but who's going to pay this extra? So, because I have economic background, so in economics, the basic principle, basic criteria is this one: effectiveness and efficiency. So when you design, when you propose your green infra project proposals, is it really efficient? Is it really cost effective? I think you have to ask yourself. Finally, the final point that I want to make is the human capital thing. Steve, at the beginning, you mentioned about the natural capital of the green component. I'm sure that more than 10 years ago, the World Bank released very interesting document beyond the GDP. And over there, the first capital we mention always is manufactured capital. That's a typical capital that we have in our mind. That's the infrastructure, okay, whether it's green or brown, it's infrastructure, okay. But the second one is the natural capital that he mentioned. But I want to add one more thing. It's not mine, I think, according to this World Bank Beyond the GDP document. The third most important capital is the human capital. So if you add this human capital component in your green infra design, that's the important factor you have to keep in mind. Finally, green infra or green thing, the enabling condition, in my opinion, you have to add the digital component, because the digital transformation can make this green much cheaper. Because if you add this digital thing, then you can easily add this human capital component of Nepal. I know that you have really good human resources, so you can add this positive component. Plus, I think the beauty of digital transformation is that the marginal cost of expanding, scaling up your project is almost zero. So if you add this extra component of digital, then your green infrastructure project can be feasible, implementable, or you can make it happen in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jung. I think you very rightly mentioned that the additional cost is there. We have to bear it, and the learning from emerging technologies such as digitalization is very important, which can help us to reduce the cost and scale up these things. So we'll take up in further deliberation, in terms of instruments and in terms of other policy measures. We'll come back to that. But before that, at this point, I'd like to invite Honorable Minister for kindly sharing his thoughts and your insights in this discussion.
धन्यवाद। सर्वप्रथम मैले नेपाल उद्योग परिसंघले यो महत्त्वपूर्ण कार्यक्रम आयोजना गरेकोमा म नेपाल उद्योग परिसंघलाई धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। यो वास्तवमा भने एउटा अन्तर्क्रियाले हामीले चाहिँ एउटा बाटो निकाल्न सक्छौं र जुन मुलुकमा विकासको मामलामा भइरहेको अवरोध र भइरहेको समस्याबारे या जुन हामीले नेपालमा हरित पूर्वाधार विकासको असरहरूबारे जुन प्रकारले छलफल गरिरहेका छौं त्यसको चाहिँ हामीले निचोड निकाल्न सक्छौं। त्यसकारण मैले यो नेपाल उद्योग परिसंघले एउटा नयाँ मोडलमा नयाँ तरिकाबाट जुन यो कार्यक्रम आयोजना गरेकोमा म पुनः धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। यस्तो प्रोग्राम मलाई लाग्छ कि हामीले बीचबीचमा गरिराख्नु पर्छ। हामीले धेरै कार्यक्रमहरू गर्छौं, धेरै कार्यक्रम हामीले साथीहरूले बोलाउँछौं, हामी जान्छौं, भाषण गर्छौं, तर निचोड निस्किँदैन। तर मलाई लाग्छ यो कार्यक्रमले एउटा निचोड निस्किन्छ र हामी कार्यान्वयन पक्षमा जानलाई सजिलो हुन्छ। हामीले त्यो कार्यान्वयन गराउनमा पनि एकदमै सजिलो हुन्छ र तपाईहरुकोबाट जुन प्रकारले आज सुझावहरू आएको छ र जुन सुझावहरू अझ पनि आउँछ त्यसले वन तथा वातावरण मन्त्रालयले पूरा गर्नेछ भन्ने म विश्वास दिलाउन चाहन्छु। वास्तवमा आजको चाहिँ आवश्यकता भौतिक पूर्वाधार विकास मानव सभ्यता र आर्थिक समृद्धिको पूर्व शर्त हो। हाम्रो जीवनलाई छिटो र छरितो, सरल र सहज तथा सभ्य र सम्पन्न बनाउनको लागि भौतिक पूर्वाधारको अहम भूमिका रहेको हुन्छ। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय समुदायको तुलनामा नेपालको भौतिक पूर्वाधारको विकासको मात्रा र गुणस्तर दुवैमा अन्त्य न्यून रहेको छ। यस सम्बन्धमा अध्ययन अनुसन्धानको मात्रा पनि अन्त्य कमजोर रहेको छ। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय समुदायको तुलनामा नेपालको भौतिक पूर्वाधारको विकास मात्रा र गुणस्तर दुवैमा अन्त्य न्यून रहेको छ। लामो राजनीतिक सङ्घर्ष र समझदारीमा संहितासहित नेपालको संविधान 2072 आएको छ र त्यो संविधानप्रति पनि मधेसी, दलित, जनजाति, आदिवासी, महिला लगायतका सीमाङ्कित परिवार असन्तुष्टि जनाएको छ र अहिले पनि सङ्घर्ष जारी राखेको छ। किनकि धेरै हाम्रो संविधानमा धेरै कुरा चाहिँ जनजातिलाई चाहिँ समेटेको छैन, मधेसीले पनि यसको लागि राजनीतिक रूपमा कुराहरू भइरहेको छ र राजनीतिक रूपले नै त्यसलाई समेट्ने र सम्बोधन गर्ने पनि कार्य भोलिको दिनमा राज्यले गर्नेछ भन्ने हामीले विश्वास पनि लिएको छु र खास गरेर अहिले देशमा 3 तहको सरकार छ, सङ्घीय सरकार छ, प्रदेश सरकार छ, स्थानीय सरकार छ र तीनै तह सरकारले भौतिक पूर्वाधार र हरित विकासबारे निश्चित रूपमा कामहरू अगाडि बढाएको छ र अबको बाटो हरित अर्थतन्त्रको बाटो हो। अहिले हामीले कोभिड-19ले पनि हामीले एउटा पाठ सिकाएको छ र हिजोको जुन घटना भयो पाकिस्तानमा त्यो घटनाले पनि हामीले सिक्नुपर्छ। हामी पाकिस्तानको घटनाभन्दा अगाडि निश्चित रूपमा यो जलवायु परिवर्तन बारे हामीले मजाक रूपमा ठानेको थिए र मलाई लाग्छ कि धेरै विद्वानहरूले पनि आनाकानी गर्थ्यो। तर पाकिस्तानको घटना जुन भएको छ जलवायु परिवर्तनको कारणले गर्दा त्यसले नेपालले पनि पाठ सिक्नुपर्छ। किनकि पाकिस्तानको जुन भूगोल छ र नेपालको जुन भूगोल छ, हिमकुश नदीको शिकार पाकिस्तान पनि भएको छ र नेपाल पनि हिमकुश नदीको भूगोलमा पर्छ। त्यसकारण पाकिस्तान र नेपाल त्यही हिसाबको देश हो पनि बुझ्नुपर्छ। र अहिले जुन पाकिस्तानमा घटना भएको छ, हजारौँ मानिसको मृत्यु भएछ, 5 लाख भन्दा मानिस बेघर भएको छ, विस्थापित भएको छ र पाकिस्तानमा को जमिनहरूमा 2/3 करिब पानीले ओगटेको छ अहिलेको अवस्थामा र त्यहाँको अवस्था भयावह भएको छ। र त्यो किन आयो भने त्यस्तो अवस्था किन आयो भने जलवायु परिवर्तनको कारणले आयो र हामीले जलवायु परिवर्तनमा के गरिरहेको छ भने त्यो पनि हाम्रो चुनौतीको विषय हो। विकासको रूपमा हामीले पहाडमा हेरौँ, जब स्थानीय सरकार आयो राम्रो कुरा हो। संविधानले स्थानीयलाई धेरै ताकत दिनु पनि पर्छ। हामी संहिताले लडेको हौँ, कार्यान्वयन पनि गराउनुपर्छ। तर जुन जितेको मेयर साहबहरूले पहाडमा के गरे त? जेएसपी लगायो, डाँडा काँडालाई भड्कायो र असार र साउन महिनामा पानी आयो, सयकौँ घरलाई बगाएर लग्यो, सयकौँ व्यक्तिले मार्न काम गर्यो। त्यो हाम्रो कुन मोडलमा विकास गरे त? हामीले कुन विज्ञको रिपोर्ट हो त? त्यसकारण यो जुन डोजर आतङ्क छ त्यो पनि हामीले बन्द गर्नुपर्छ र त्यसको लागि हामीले एउटा कडा कानुन बनाउनुपर्छ। र हामीले जबसम्म डोजर आतङ्क बन्द गरेन र कडा कानुन बनाएन भने जुन प्रकारले हाम्रा पहाडलाई खनन गरेर हाम्रो प्राकृतिक सम्पदालाई नष्ट गर्ने र बिना प्लानको विकास गर्ने, सिधै मेयर साहब भयो, गाउँपालिका प्रमुख भयो, आफै ठेकेदार पनि भयो, आफै डोजर किन्ने, आफै ठेकेदार पनि, आफै मेयर पनि। भन्दाखेरि मेयर साहबहरूले दुःख लाग्यो होला, कोही कुरा जान्छ भने सत्य कुरा त्यो पनि हो। किन हामीले मुलुक बचाउनुपर्छ, हाम्रो सम्पदालाई बचाउनुपर्छ, हाम्रो यहाँ मानिसलाई जोगाउनुपर्छ। त्यो पनि हाम्रो मुलुकमा एक नयाँ कानुनको आवश्यकता छ र त्यो नयाँ कानुन र कडा कानुन बनाएर पनि हामीले यो डोजर आतङ्क बन्द गर्नुपर्छ। नत्र भने विकासको नाउँमा हाम्रो देशलाई नै नष्ट गर्छौँ, मुलुकलाई नै बर्बाद पुर्याउन काम गर्छौँ। ठिक छ, विकास गरौँ, कमसेकम विज्ञहरूको सल्लाह, त्यो बारेमा अनुभव छैन, अब हामी हात लगाइदिन्छौँ। त्यसकारण विज्ञहरूको सल्लाह र सुझावको पनि आवश्यकता छ। र अहिलेको चाहिँ खास गरेर जुन प्रकारले आज बहस चलिरहेको छ, अहिलेको पहिला पनि भने, अहिले हरित अर्थतन्त्रको दिशामा जाने हो भने भौतिक पूर्वाधार विकास गर्दा हुने वातावरणीय क्षतिलाई कसरी कम गर्ने त भने हाम्रो विशेष ध्यान जानुपर्छ। हामीले विकास पनि गर्नु परेको छ र वातावरणलाई संरक्षण पनि गर्नुपर्ने छ। दुवै सँगै जानुपर्छ। वातावरणलाई जोगाउनुपर्छ, विकास पनि गर्नुपर्छ। विकास निर्माण गर्दा वातावरण मैत्री वस्तुको प्रयोग गर्नु, रिसाइकल गरिएको वस्तुबाट निर्मित निर्माण सामग्री प्रयोगतर्फ पनि हाम्रो ध्यान जान आवश्यक छ। रिसाइकल गरिएको सामग्री प्रयोगले वातावरण प्रदूषणमा कमी आउनुको साथै यसले अन्य क्षेत्रले पनि यसतर्फ आकर्षित गर्नुपर्छ। वातावरण संरक्षण ऐनले EIA र IAEA को बारेमा प्रष्ट व्यवस्था गरेको छ। वन ऐनले र वन क्षेत्रको जग्गा प्राप्त गर्ने आधार र रुख कटानको बारेमा प्रष्ट व्यवस्था गरेको छ। वन मन्त्रालयले खास गरेर मेरो मन्त्रालय जुन मैले जिम्मेवारी पाएको छु, यो कुरा हामी तपाईँ के बुझ्नुभएछ भने मेरो मन्त्रालय ताली खाने मन्त्रालय होइन, मेरो मन्त्रालय गाली खाने मन्त्रालय हो र हामीले यसको चाहिँ शपथ लिएको छु गाली खाने मन्त्रालयमा। किनभने अब रुख कटान गर्ने आदेश दियो भने वातावरण जोगाउने टिम जुन छ सिधै गाली गर्ने आउँछ। यो मन्त्रीले त वन मास्यो, वनलाई नष्ट गर्यो, वातावरण बिगाड्यो, यो त खत्तम मन्त्री रहेछ। र रुख काट्ने आदेश दिएन भने यो मन्त्री त बदमास रहेछ, विकास विरोधी रहेछ, यो त विकासै नष्ट गर्यो भने एउटा अलगको ग्रुप आउँछ। त्यसकारण यो मन्त्रालय गाली खाने मन्त्रालय हो, ताली खाने मन्त्रालय होइन। त्यसको लागि हामी शपथ लिएको छौँ र त्यसको लागि हामी जिम्मेवारी पनि लिन तयार छौँ। तर म जुन दिनदेखि जिम्मेवारी लिएको छु, विकासलाई कहिले पनि अवरोध गरेको छैन। मैले यो मन्त्रालयलाई ताली खाने मन्त्रालय कसरी बनाउँछु त्यसको लागि हाम्रो टिम, मन्त्रालयका टिम, हाम्रा राष्ट्रिय कर्मचारी मिलेर हामी काम गरिरहेको छौँ। त्यसको उदाहरण छ भर्खरै चितवन जिल्लाको माडी 6 वर्षदेखि बाटो अवरोध थियो निकुञ्जको कारणले गर्दा। त्यहाँका नागरिक निकुञ्जलाई लाग्थ्यो कि शत्रु हो, यो निकुञ्ज किन बन्यो, यो बन्द गर्नुपर्छ। निकुञ्जको कर्मचारीले हेर्ने बित्तिकै रिस उठेर आँखा यस्तो चिम्लाएर बोल्थ्यो त्यहाँको नागरिक माडीका। यही हाम्रो डिजी साहब हुनुहुन्छ, यही हाम्रो रोस्टममा हुनुहुन्छ हाम्रा डिजी साहब, म र मेरा सचिव, हामी टिम लिएर त्यहाँका मेयर रेणु दाहालजीले लिएर फेरि माडीका मेयर साहबले पनि लिएर भरतपुर गएर माडीका हामी ठाउँमा पुगेँ र हामी अन्तर्क्रिया गरेँ। अन्तर्क्रिया कहाँ गरेँ भने सडकमा, कुनै यस्तो हलमा कुर्सीमा बसेर होइन, उभिएर 1 to 1 म आफै अन्तर्क्रिया गरेँ। र मिडियामा पनि आएको कुरा हो, तपाईँले बुझ्न सक्नुहुन्छ, माडी कुनै ठुलो सबैको सम्बन्ध पनि होला। त्यहाँ देन एन्ड देयर हामीले समस्याको समाधान गरेँ र 6 वर्षदेखि जुन बाटो अवरोध थियो बाटो कामको सुचारू गरेँ। हामीले बाटो निकालेँ। कसरी निस्किने हो भने सोच राम्रो हुनुपर्छ, नियत राम्रो हुनुपर्छ र मुटु हुनुपर्छ भने बाटो निस्किन्छ र वन्यजन्तुको क्षति पनि हुँदैन। त्यहाँ के गर्यो भने कोर्टले के गरेछ भने यो जुन बाटो बनाइले बन्द गर तर विकल्प देऊ भनेछ। कोर्टले त सबै दिनको लागि बन्द गर्ने आदेश त दिएको थिएन मन्त्रीले। तर मन्त्रीजीहरू के गर्थ्यो भने कुनै मन्त्रीको मैले यहाँ क्रिटिसाइज गरेको होइन, हाम्रो सम्मानित मन्त्रीजीहरू होला, पूर्व मन्त्रीजीहरू, उहाँहरूको मैले यहाँ कुनै क्रिटिसाइज गरेको होइन। तर कमसेकम अध्ययन गर्नुपर्छ कोर्टले के डिसिसन गर्यो। हामीले पाना पाना पर्नुपर्छ। कहीँ बाटो छोडेछ कि कोर्टले ठ्याक्कै बाटो छोडिरहेको छ, विकल्प देऊ। हामीले विकल्प दिए। विकल्प के दिए भने वन्यजन्तु जानको लागि ओभरब्रिज बनाइदिए, भयो, बाटो खुल्यो। कोर्टले त भनेको छैन कि जनताले बाटो रोकिदेऊ। हामीले ओभरब्रिजको लागि प्रस्ताव गरे, भौतिक योजना मन्त्रालयले स्वीकृति गर्यो, एक्सेप्ट गर्यो, बाटो खुल्यो। त्यहाँ दमादम काम भइरहेको छ। वन्यजन्तु जानेको लागि तलबाट चाहिँ अब गेडा होला, हात्ती होला, आफ्नो तलबाट जान्छ, माथिबाट ओभरब्रिज हुन्छ, पुल माथिबाट गाडी घोडा जान्छ। आफ्नो ठाउँ ठाउँमा हामी ओभरब्रिज दिए, त बाटो खुल्यो। भनेको मतलब के हो भने उदाहरण मात्र दियो, यसको विषय त थिएन, तर पनि त्यो विषय पनि हो। हामीले विकास पनि गर्नुपर्छ र वातावरण पनि जोगाउनुपर्छ भनेको मतलब त्यो हो। हामीले अहिले वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कका हाम्रा प्रतिनिधिहरू हुन्छ, उहाँको एउटा रुख, उहाँको लगानीमा जलविद्युत आयोजनाको एउटा 26,000 रुख कटानको आएको थियो। मैले रोकेँ, रुख कटान 26,000 गर्न दिँदैन। मैले आदेश गरेँ कि रुख सङ्ख्या बढी भएको हुनाले यसलाई छलफल गरेर पुनर्विचार गर्नुपर्छ र त्यो घटेर ल्याउने ठाउँसम्म आएछ। टेक्निकल टिम राखेँ हामीले। म त टेक्निकल मान्छे होइन, म टेक्निकल त्यो विज्ञ पनि होइन। म राम्रो सपना हेर्ने देशको एउटा प्रतिनिधि हुँ र हाम्रा निर्वाचन क्षेत्रका जनताले 5 घन्टा 4 घन्टा लगाएर घाम पानीको प्रवाह नगरेर मत दिएको छ। यसकारण कि मेरो प्रतिनिधिले राम्रो काम गर्छ, त्यस कारण हामी सपना राम्रो हेर्छौँ। तर टेक्निकल पाटोलाई सल्लाह गरेर त्यो दिन के गरेँ भने हामी टेक्निकल हाम्रो विज्ञहरूसित सल्लाह गरेँ, हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय कर्मचारीज्यूहरू सल्लाह गरे र टिम गयो। टिम गरेर के गरे भने त्यहाँ 26,000 रुख कटान गर्नु छ भने त्यसलाई टेक्निकल विज्ञज्यूहरूको सल्लाहबाट हामी 58सम्म झारे। त्यो राम्रो काम गरेन हामीले, त्यो विकास पनि हुन्छ। ठिक छ, 5800 रुख घटाउने आदेश दिने, त्यसको लागि अब 10 गुणा रुख रोप्ने काम पनि गराउने त्यो हाम्रो वन नियम छ। अर्को कुरा के छ भने अब हाम्रो वनमा एउटै नियम छैन, यो पनि बुझ्नुपर्छ। अब हाम्रा साथीहरू बाहिर बुझ्दैन, वनले धेरै बदमासी गर्यो, रोकिदियो। अब निकुञ्जको अलग नियम छ, राष्ट्रिय निकुञ्जको अलग नियम छ, उहाँ निकुञ्जको डिजी साहब पनि हुनुहुन्छ। वनको अलग नियम छ, वन ऐन अलगै छ, निकुञ्जको अलगै नियम छ, नियमावली अलगै छ। सबै कुरा मिलाउनुपर्छ हामीले। अब वन ऐनको नियम मिलेन भने हामीले भटाभट कसरी आदेश दिने, त्यो पनि हामीसित समस्या छ र चुनौती पनि छ। त्यसकारण हामीले वातावरण पनि जोगाउनुपर्छ र विकास पनि सँगैसँगै लिएर जानुपर्छ। र हामीले अबको जुन मोडल छ, हामीले वास्तवमा अबको मोडल हरित अर्थतन्त्रको मोडलमा हामीले जानुपर्छ र खास गरेर हरित तन्त्रको दिशामा जाने हो भने मुलुकको समृद्धि हुन्छ र मुलुक पनि बच्छ, मुलुक पनि जोग्छ र हाम्रो विकास पनि हुन्छ। र कमसेकम म बढी मेरो ध्यान कहाँ जान्छ है, तपाईँहरूले लाग्छ होला किन यो मन्त्रीले बकबक गरिरहेछ। यो सबभन्दा मैले कहाँ दिमाग खराब छ भने यो डोजर आतङ्कमा के, यो डोजर आतङ्क मलाई एकदम रिस उठ्छ कि। अब बुद्धि छैन, डाँडाकाँडा भस्काइदिन्छ, त्यो त कमजोर हुन्छ नि त। कमजोर हुन्छ। पानीको मौसम आउँछ, अहिले आयो पानीको मौसम, हेर्नुलाई कति क्षति हुन्छ, कति घर बगाउँछ, त्यो परिवारलाई कसले जोगाइदिन्छ। फेरि केही अहिलेको चुनावमा किन धेरै मेयर साहब हार्नुभयो? 2-3%, 5% मात्र जितेको होला मेयर साहब दोबारा, बाँकी सब साफ भयो। किनकि आफै मेयर, आफै ठेकदार, आफै डोजर किन्ने, आफै डोजर लगाइदिने, भस्काइदिने, अनि पुरा डाँडाकाँडा भस्काएर नष्ट गरिदिने। हाम्रो प्राकृतिक सम्पदा नष्ट गर्ने कारणले ईश्वरले पनि सुन्यो, हराइदियो। म पनि पाप गल्ती गर्छु भने ईश्वर मैले सुनिहाल्छ, मलाई पनि हराइदिन्छ। त्यसकारण हामीले कमसेकम विज्ञहरूको सुझाव, विज्ञहरूको सल्लाह लिनुपर्छ र विज्ञहरूको सल्लाह र सुझाव लिएर अगाडि बढ्नुपर्छ भन्ने मेरो सोच। किनकि हामी राजनीतिक व्यक्ति ठुलो सपना त हेर्छौँ, तर सल्लाहकारको सल्लाह लिने भने दुर्घटनामा परिहाल्छु। त्यसैले तपाईँहरू जस्तो अब यहाँ विद्वानहरू जुन आउनुभएको छ उहाँहरूको सल्लाह र सुझावको हामीलाई सञ्जीवनी बुटीको काम गर्छ। सल्लाह र सुझाव लिनुको लागि त कुनै लाज मान्नु पर्दैन। म सांसद आएदेखि सांसद बनेर जब आएँ धेरै विधेयकमा छलफल हुन्थ्यो र सबै विधेयकको म ज्ञाता त थिएन, तर विधेयक लिएर यसको विज्ञ को हुनुहुन्थ्यो घर जान्थेँ मैले। विज्ञहरू पनि खुसी हुनुहुन्थ्यो कि सांसद त मेरो घर आयो नि सोध्नलाई, सही सल्लाह दिन्थ्यो। अब त्यसको लागि म लाज मानु कि म सांसद हुँ आफूले घमण्ड गरौँ अनि म नजाउँ भने अगाडि पार्लियामेन्टमा विषयवस्तु थाहै छैन बोलिदिउँ, दुनियाँले के भन्छ कि त्यो त लाइभ हुन्छ, दुनियाँले हेरेको हुन्छ। त्यहाँदेखि कस्तो सांसद रहेछ यो बोल्नै आउँदैन यसलाई, त्यस्तो पनि हुन्छ। त्यस कारण मैले विज्ञहरूको सुझाव सल्लाह लिएर अगाडि बढ्छु। त्यस कारण लिनु पनि पर्छ र अगाडि पनि बढ्छ। आज कोही महत्त्वपूर्ण छलफलमा आज मैले धेरै कुरा सुन्नु थियो, मलाई धेरै कुरा बोल्नु मलाई, किनकि यो विषय मलाई धेरै राम्रो लागेको थियो। जुन आयोजकलाई म पटक पटक धन्यवाद किन दिइरहेको छु भने वास्तवमा यो यस्तो प्रोग्राम हामीले यस्तो डिबेट हामी गरिराख्नुपर्छ र हामीले यस्तो डिबेटबाट निचोड निकालेर हामी कार्यान्वयन पक्ष पनि जानुपर्छ। हामी कार्यान्वयन पक्षमा गयो भने सुधारको बाटो निस्किन्छ र यस्तै महत्त्वपूर्ण ठाउँमा हामी एउटा निर्णय गरेर भोलि चाहिँ नेपाल सरकारबाट हुने काम पनि गर्नुपर्छ। तर आज के भयो भने आज महत्त्वपूर्ण बैठक छ, क्याबिनेट छ, 5 बजे थियो, 5:15 हुन लाग्यो, अन्तिममा म छु। धेरै कुरा सुन्न पनि बाँकी नै थियो, तर हाम्रा सर हुनुहुन्छ उहाँले चाहिँ म उहाँले पहिला नै भनिसकेको छु कि आजको जुन रिपोर्ट छ त्यो राख्नु होला र मलाई आवाज पठाउनु होला। तपाईँको जे सल्लाह छ वन तथा वातावरण मन्त्रालयबाट हुने म अक्षरश पालन गर्छु, म विश्वास दिलाउन चाहन्छु। अहिले वास्तवमा सामान्य प्रधानमन्त्रीजीले पनि गएको कोपमा र वचनबद्ध प्रतिबद्ध गरेर आउनु भएछ कि 2045सम्म कार्बन क्रेडिट म 0 गर्छु। अब सामान्य प्रधानमन्त्रीजीले भनेपछि उनका मन्त्रीले त कुद्नुपर्छ। अब त्यो कुद्नको निमित्त वातावरण मन्त्रालयले कमर कसेको छ। अहिले 50सम्म भनेको भए ठिक हुन्थ्यो कि हाम्रो भित्रमा छलफल भएको थियो, तर प्रधानमन्त्रीजीले 45 भन्नुभएछ भने 2045सम्म हामीले कार्बन उत्सर्जन 0 गर्नुपर्छ भने त्यसमा हामी लागि परेको छौँ। र अहिलेको जुन कोप छ इजिप्टमा त्यसको लागि पनि वन तथा वातावरण मन्त्रालय कार्यहरू अगाडि बढेको छ। मेरो अध्यक्षतामा पनि बैठकहरू पटक भइरहेको छ, सचिवजीको अध्यक्षतामा पनि बैठक भइरहेको छ र हाम्रा महाशाखाका प्रमुखको पनि अध्यक्षतामा बैठकहरू बसिरहेको छ र त्यसको लागि वातावरण मन्त्रालयले काम पनि अगाडि बढिरहेको छ। कुन काम हामी गऱ्यौँ भने 2045सम्म वास्तवमा कार्बन क्रेडिट हामी 0 गर्छौँ, त्यसको लागि हामी काम गरिरहेको छौँ। हुन त यहाँ बिजनेसम्यानहरू पनि धेरै होला। अहिले मैले कमर्सियल गाडीहरूमा Euro 6 लागू गर्न गइरहेको छु र म अग्रपन्थीमा अगाडि बढिसकेको छु र भारत पनि 2020मा नै Euro 6मा गइरहेको छ, Euro 8 को तयारी गरिरहेको छ। भुटान जस्तो देश Euro 6मा गइरहेको छ। हाम्रो डिजलहरू Euro 6 को लागि आइरहेको छ र अहिले हामी Euro 3मा चलिरहेको छौँ। त्यसले हामीलाई के क्षति गरिरहेको छ, म पहिला पनि भने म टेक्निकल मान्छे होइन, म राजनीतिक मान्छे हुँ, राम्रो सपना हेर्छु र टेक्निकल मान्छे यसमा धेरै आउनुभएको छ। तपाईँहरूको सुझाव र सल्लाह नै हाम्रो लागि सञ्जीवनी बुटी हो, हाम्रो लागि मार्गदर्शन हो। तपाईँहरू जस्तो टेक्निकल मान्छेको सुझाव र सल्लाह लिएर सामान्य प्रधानमन्त्रीजीको जुन 2045 को घोषणा छ कि कार्बन क्रेडिट 0 गर्छु, त्यसको लागि वातावरण मन्त्रालयले काम गर्नुपर्छ। त्यसको लागि मैले काम अगाडि बढाएको छु र मलाई लाग्छ यही हप्ताभित्रमा Euro 6 लागू हुन्छ। त्यसको लागि धेरै कार्य अगाडि बढिसकेको छ। कार्यबाट रिपोर्टहरू आउने क्रम जारी छ, अन्तिम चरणमा छ। 2-3 दिनमा रिपोर्ट आउँछ, यही हप्तामा क्याबिनेटले डिसिसन गर्छ त्यसको लागि काम। किनकि बोलेर गऱ्यो भने राम्रो हुन्छ। यो कुरा अगाडि मैले बढाएको छु र यहाँ आएका सम्पूर्ण चाहिँ हाम्रा विद्वान वक्ताहरूले सबैको सुझाव र सल्लाह जुन आएको छ र उहाँहरूको पनि यही आएको छ आजको आवश्यकता हरित पूर्वाधार आजको दिनमा एकदम जरुरी छ भने आएको छ र वास्तवमा हामीले कार्बन उत्सर्जन अन्त्य गर्ने र हाम्रो विकास मोडल अबको कार्बन उत्सर्जन कम गर्ने खालको हुनुपर्छ भने सल्लाह पनि आएको छ। उहाँको सल्लाहमा वन तथा वातावरण मन्त्रालयले काम अगाडि बढाएको पनि छ र भोलि बढाउने पनि छ र आजको जुन प्रस्तुतिमा र आजको जुन छलफलमा जुन निष्कर्ष आउँछ म पुनः भन्न चाहन्छु तपाईहरुको निष्कर्ष अक्षरश पालन गर्न मेरो मन्त्रालयले कोसिस गर्छ भने म तपाईहरुले विश्वास दिलाउन चाहन्छु र ज्यादा एउटा यो भन्न चाहन्छु प्लिज तपाईहरु जुन बिजनेसम्यान जोडेर आउनु भएको छ कृपया वन मन्त्रालयलाई भिलनको रूपमा नहेरिदिनु होला। यो मन्त्रालय तपाईहरुको हो र म यो मन्त्रालयको जिम्मेवारी जो पाएदेखि तपाईहरुको कुनै पनि समस्या छ भने EIA मा साथीहरु भन्छ कि धेरै कामहरु रोकिदिन्छ मन्त्रालयले फाइन अड्काइदिन्छ तपाईहरु सिधै मन्त्रीका आउनुस् कुनै रोकटोक छैन। मेरो सचिवालयले तपाईहरुको फाइलको काम गर्छ डकुमेन्ट कम छ भने तपाईहरुले ल्याउनुस् पुर्याउनुस् तर तपाईहरुको अब चाहिँ मैले एउटा के निर्णय गरिरहेको छु भने यहाँ 2 वर्ष EI को लागि लाग्छ हामीबाट पहिला EI को लागि स्वीकृति लिनुहुन्छ म गर्न गइरहेको छु तर साथीहरुले 2 वर्ष लगाइदिन्छ तर मैले अब एउटा निर्णय गर्न गइरहेको छु भने 6 महिना भन्दा कमसेकम 6 महिना त दिन्छु किन EI हो टाइम त लाग्छ नापी गर्नुपर्छ धेरै कुरा छ तर 6 महिना भन्दा बढी लगाउनु भयो भने त्यो स्वीकृति हुँदैन त्यो स्वीकृति गर्दैन हामीले त्यो हामी निर्णय गर्न गइरहेको छौँ 6 महिना भित्रमा हामी गर्छौँ र हाम्रो मन्त्रालय अन्तर्गत कुनै पनि तपाईहरुको फाइल अड्केको छ कुनै व्यापारीको समस्या छ भने तपाईहरु सिधै मका आउनुस् त्यो समस्या हामी हल गर्छौँ यो तपाईहरुको प्रतिबद्धता जनाउनु छ र आजको चाहिँ महत्त्वपूर्ण प्रोग्राममा मलाई तपाईहरुले बोल्ने अवसर दिनुभयो अध्यक्षता गर्ने पनि अवसर दिनुभयो त्यसको लागि तपाईहरुले धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिँदै म बिदा हुन्छु। धन्यवाद नमस्कार।
निस्किँदै हुनुहुन्छ तर उहाँलाई हामी धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद भन्न चाहन्छौँ उहाँको समयका लागि त्यसै कारणले उहाँलाई मायाको चिनो हामी प्रदान गर्न गइरहेका छौँ र सो गरिदिनुको लागि म राजेश अग्रवालजीलाई माथि मञ्चमा बोलाउन चाहन्छु CNI का भाइस प्रेसिडेन्ट उहाँलाई यो मायाको चिनो दिइदिनको लागि हामी विनम्र अनुरोध गर्दछौँ र माननीय मन्त्रीज्यूलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद उहाँको समय र यी सम्पूर्ण प्रतिबद्धताहरू हामी सबैको अगाडि राखिदिनु भएकोमा उहाँलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद पनि हामी व्यक्त गर्न चाहन्छौँ र उहाँले भन्नुभयो झै आजको यस सेसनको सम्पूर्ण प्रोसिडिङ्स पनि उहाँलाई हामी ह्यान्डओभर अवश्य पनि गर्नेछौँ। माननीय मन्त्रीज्यूलाई पुनः एकपटक धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद एन्ड आई वुड वन्स अगेन लाइक to request Dr. Shawakar to kindly carry forward.
Thank you, Sadiksha. We like to once again thank Honorable Minister. I think for those of our foreign participants, maybe I'd like to say a few words about the messages our Honorable Minister wanted to share. Honorable Minister mentioned that green infrastructure discussion is very, very timely. And the Ministry of Environment and Forest is very much committed to the green infrastructure and green development. He highlighted the fact that inclusive development is very important. Now Nepal has gone to the federal structure, to the 3 levels of governments, and needs some coordination, and the development and environment has to go together. And we need to have a comprehensive planning and doing a piecemeal basis. Just scratching the mountains here and there to make an unplanned road and some other infrastructure development is not a right course for development. He also mentioned that the different level of governance need to work together, and also he showed the commitment of the ministry to implement 2045 target of the government, net zero emission, which the Prime Minister made in COP26 in Glasgow. And also he highlighted the fact that Euro 6 emission standards are enforced in even country like India and Bhutan, and Nepal is still, we are running in Euro 3. So minister would like to see that Nepal would go to higher standard in the Euro 6. And most importantly, I think myself also being a scholar and a lot of our colleagues here, he emphasized need for experts' advice and need for experts' input in the policy making process, and the minister made a commitment that he liked to listen from the experts' view, and the decision and the policy making should be very much informed policy. So I think those were the message from the Honorable Minister, and he gave few examples which I'm trying to skip in the interest of time. So I think we'll go forward with where we left with very important insights and message from the Honorable Minister. We are discussing about scaling up green infrastructure, and we have a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, and one of the important way to upscale green infrastructure, because there is a huge investment needs and investment gap. Recent study, not recent actually, 2017 study by International Finance Corporation, IFC, said that Nepal has $46 billion climate smart investment potential, and the gap is huge. So which means that we need the effort, especially from the financial mechanisms and the instruments. So in that respect, I'd like to invite Mr. Ramkrishna Khatiwada to really share what kind of initiative we have, especially what kind of financial instruments and the financial related policies are under plan, or what we must do, something on the financial instruments. So.
Thank you, Sabhakar sir. Fellow panelists, so you have already mentioned that based on the IFC study, we need around 46 billion for the climate smart investment, and which itself is the larger than the current financial system. For making this financial system, it took around 5-6 decades. So in this 7-8 years time frame, obviously we cannot finance those $46 billion by the government treasury. We have to look on the private sector investment, and as Stephen rightly pointed out that there should be the private sector who will invest and who will contribute in the green infrastructure. But obviously in finance, we normally say that the cost and benefits should go hand in hand. So who bears the cost? That must be benefited in the future, or at least there should be some incentive mechanism to come the private sector into green infrastructure. So obviously there are the many opportunity in the green infrastructure in Nepal. So hydropower is the one area that private sector has been financing, and even financial institution also has been financing in the larger chunk, and till now we have already committed roughly around $4 billion in the hydropower sector, and also in the coming days also one area of the investment would be the hydropower. The second area we are looking basically for the green infrastructure is urban and industrial infrastructure. So coming to your question, that for these kind of arranging those kind of the investment, we need to have a different rules, regulation, framework, and instrument. So in this context, obviously government of Nepal and the central bank, the regulator of the financial system, both have been working in some concrete way. So in terms of the central bank rules and regulation, especially to emphasizing the investment in the green energy, especially hydropower project, there is a directive lending of the 10% of the loans should be invested in the hydropower or energy sector, and parallelly in other sector also there is a green and other related framework. So one notable framework is ESRM framework, that is related to encouraging the financial institution to look the ESG and the environmental and social angle before investing in any kind of the infrastructure project, and that is the notable area that central bank has been year on year updating and giving the signal to the financial institution that there should be some stringent rules and regulation. And the second notable area that central bank has announced in this monetary policy that green taxonomy will be implemented, will be formalized in this fiscal year. So that is the document we are expecting, which give some level of the comfort to the financial institution. Also, there should have some level of the credit enhancement mechanism to encourage financial institution as well as private sector to come to the green infrastructure project. Parallelly, there are the different instruments which we have been talking in. NIFRA has been working with the Ministry of Finance to come up with a green bond. That is the major area internationally. The green bond, every year growth is 20 to 25% in contrary to the conventional bond of the around 2 and 3%. So this gives the clear level of the opportunity to Nepalese infrastructure sector to come up with or utilize those international resources. In this regard, the current year budget itself, government of Nepal announced that the government will work on the framing the green bond and also look the possibility of going on the sovereign green bond. And parallelly, the other instrument we talk about the blended finance is credit enhancement is not the role of the pure the government side. There should be the other actor in this green infrastructure sector like multilateral, philanthropic capital, and even government instrumentalities, government promoted financial institution, and so blending all the sources available in the international, local, government, and the private sector, we can work out on the or fulfill the gap of those infrastructure or notably green infrastructure finance. So parallelly, the other instrument that government also or central bank is coming with a green loan or green, basically green financing, and the UNDP and other multilateral institutions also jointly working with the government of Nepal and the central bank to come up with those instruments. So these are some of the instruments that government of Nepal and the regulator, central bank, both have been working, and we see that at least we cannot commit the complete fulfillment of the $46 billion by 2030, but at least the joint effort from the government of Nepal and the financial institution and the private sector notably will be fulfilling the certain chunk of that infrastructure financing gap or in green infrastructure financing gap in future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Khattiora. Yes, thank you for outlining a range of instruments which are under discussion, or some of them are already in offing. I think you raised a number of different instruments, of course, from the central bank, ESRM, which mandates lending by the banks to be considered risk, environmental and socio-economic risk, and also PPP, blended finance, potential green bonds. So the range of instruments perhaps need to be further scaled up and need to be implemented. I think I'm quite mindful of the fact that our time is running out. But one area perhaps we did not discuss, and maybe I would like to take some suggestions from the panel, is for the role of private sector. Because I think all of us know that, I think Mr. Khattiora already mentioned that making $46 billion even for our climate smart investment need is not very easy. And the role of private sector is very, very important and instrumental. So in what way private sector and government, central bank, how they play a role together in a very synergistic fashion. So maybe this is one point I'd like to get some insight from the panelists. Maybe Professor Jung.
If you see the whole picture, landscape of climate finance, there are a lot many instruments, as you know, the loan, equity, bond, and so on. But one thing I want to highlight is the guarantee. Because if you see the whole portfolio of climate finance, either in public or private, they don't really use this instrument. If you use guarantee, then you can really scale up, or you can move more financial resources. For example, in the morning, I think Dr. Lohani mentioned the innovative financing schemes and so on, and he highlighted the importance of a risk, whatever risk, political risk, policy risk, currency, and private risk, how to hedge the risk. And at that part, if you consider seriously the risk component, then you better explore the high usage of guarantee instrument rather than loan or something. So that's something that I want to add.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Professor Jung. Steve, do you want to add anything on that?
Yes, thank you very much. Another opportunity for Nepal specifically is in fiscal transfers. As the country continues to put in place its fiscal federalism system, there is an opportunity to use environmental performance indicators for adjusting the level of fiscal transfers to lower levels of government. And this will provide an incentive for contracting green options for infrastructure versus the old school pure gray infrastructure, when actually what's needed are good combinations. But this requires building the institutional and individual capacity at the local levels so that these environmental performance indicators could be used. I mean, India does this already, and other countries are starting to do this a bit more as well. So that's another opportunity. There are a range of instruments available, but what we always like to do at the World Bank with our public sector financing is try to find opportunities that can unlock investment and participation for private sector entities to come in. And the last thing I want to highlight is that every farmer is private sector. Every individual farmer plowing the land is part of the private sector. So how individual Nepalese in the rural areas use the land has a direct impact on the viability of gray infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think since our time is running out, so I'd like to maybe request Dr. Dhital to, because Dr. Dhital brings years of experience working with the private sector in energy upscaling. So how do you see what it takes to bring private sector in?
Thank you. One point I just would like to mention here. Private sector is for making money, right? The environment, we need to create a kind of enabling environment for them to actually invest in project. So in case of hydropower, there has been significant improvements in the generation side, but transmission and distribution part is still to be, invested. So in that case, what I would, think is we need to make sure that cost-reflective tariff is one area where we could attract private sector. The second one is, from the government side or the policymaker side, we need to make sure that your investment is, although, Honorable Minister was mentioning about, environment and all those things, of course, we need to take care of those issues. Those issues needs to be included in the project itself. Mitigation measures have to be, incorporated, and the risk needs to be shared equally. But at the same time, we need to make sure that, your investment is secure. So how do you do this in case of hydropower transmission and, distribution sector is to provide access, non-discriminatory access to, all operators. That way you feel comfortable that, I will be making, my investment. I will be, ensuring that your investment is secure. And the final one, you have all those legal backing. The institutional mechanism needs to be in place where, the private sectors needs to be, it needs to be provided, sufficient, not only legal and regulatory environment, but also implementation, environment at the field. And the third one is basically needs to link with the operational requirement, meaning fair treatment with the utility and the private investors. That way we will be able to actually attract private investment in hydro sector, especially in transmission and distribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rital. With my apology to rest of the panel members, I think we are running out of the time, and also the next session and the dignitaries are already waiting. So I'll just say final words that I think this is a very interesting discussion. I'll not dare to summarize everything, but I think what we heard is that the implementation is key. We should not worry only about quantity, but the quality of infrastructure is very important, which is green, supposed to be green. There are challenges for green infrastructure, but there are opportunities, and we can make use of a lot of ongoing international movement towards green development as a way to supplement our own infrastructure need. And most importantly, we must act, and we have to learn from what others are doing outside Nepal, and also reflect and transfer that on what is doable in our context. Let me stop here, and thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you very much. Can we have a big round of applause for this fabulous panel that discussed on the opportunities for green infrastructure development. र अब हाम्रा प्यानलिस्टहरूलाई टोकन अफ एप्रिसिएसन दिनका लागि म पुनः एकपटक स्टेजमा निम्ति आउन चाहन्छु सीएनआई का भाइस प्रेसिडेन्ट राजेश अग्रवालजीलाई र अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु उहाँलाई यो टोकन अफ एप्रिसिएसन दिदिनका लागि Dr. Maheshwar Dhakal, Director General, Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation. यसैगरी Mr. Ramkrishna Khatiwada, CEO, Nepal Infrastructure Bank Limited. उहाँलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद भन्न चाहन्छौँ हामी. We'd also like to thank Professor Dr. Tae Young Jung, Professor, Yonsei University. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insights. Mr. Roberts Dobias, Advisor, Climate Change Center, National Research Council of Thailand. We'd also like to thank Mr. Stefan Danyo, Sector Leader for Sustainable Development, World Bank. Dr. Ramprasad Hidaljiलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद, former ED, Alternative Energy Promotion Center. And definitely a big thank you to our moderator, Professor Dr. Sobakar Dhakal, Vice President, Academic Affairs, Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. र एक पुनः एकपटक जोरदार ताली यो प्यानलका लागि जसले यस्तो राम्रो डिस्कसन गरेर एकदमै राम्रो निचोडहरू पनि लिएर आउनु भएको छ on this topic that we discussed, opportunities for green infrastructure development. एउटा ग्रुप फोटोको लागि म अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु. I'd like to request our distinguished panel for a group photograph. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come towards the end of the parallel session, the fifth parallel session here at Nepal Infrastructure Summit 2022, the theme Infrastructure for Growth this year. र यहाँहरु सबैजनालाई 15 मिनट्सको टी ब्रेक रहेको जानकारी पनि गराउन चाहन्छौं. यो 15 मिनेटको टी ब्रेक पश्चात हामी क्लोजिङ प्लेनरी सेसन पनि सुरुवात गर्नेछौं. त्यसैकारणले यहाँहरु सबैजनालाई 15 मिनेटको यो छोटो टी ब्रेक पछि आइदिनु हुनका लागि म हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु. र यो भन्दा अगाडिको सेसनमा मिस्टर एन्ड्रुले आफ्नो ब्याकप्याक कतै छोड्नु भएको थियो भन्ने सूचना पनि मैले पाएको थिएँ. यो खोल्दै खोल्दै लाग्छ भनेर